It's a regular morning at the school pickup. Cars are lined up along the curb. Kids chatter as backpacks swing. Everything looks familiar. Ordinary. Routine. But then, something happens that stops everyone in their tracks. A uniformed officer approaches a man standing calmly beside his car. The man doesn't resist. He doesn't shout. He doesn't run. But before anyone realizes what's happening, the officer takes action. Handcuffs appear, a command is issued, and the man is being led away. Parents watch. Children look confused. Cameras record. And yet, there's something that doesn't quite add up. The way this is unfolding feels almost too structured, almost too deliberate, as if someone had rehearsed it. But they haven't. It's real. And that's exactly what makes it so striking. You notice small details. The man's calm composure, the officer's hesitation for a split second, the silent exchange of glances. It's subtle. You might even miss it if you blink. But your mind starts to ask, why does this feel different from every other arrest or school disturbance you've ever seen? And then a thought occurs. Before judgment, before assumptions, before conclusions, there's a question that quietly demands attention. And it's a question that might change how we see authority, not just here, but everywhere. At what point should authority pause and ask questions instead of assuming? Because in moments like this, appearances can be deceiving. Routine can hide the unexpected, and the line between order and misunderstanding can be thinner than we ever imagined. In the next few minutes, we'll see how a simple school pickup turned into a scene no one expected, how one person's calm presence disrupted assumptions, and how the story, in ways you'll only understand as it unfolds, challenges everything you thought you knew about authority, perception, and trust. But before we continue, take a moment to reflect on that first question. When does authority need to pause? And when does it act too fast? Keep it in mind, because it's going to shape the way you see everything that follows. So here we are, just moments after the initial action. The scene looks simple at first glance. A man being escorted by uniformed officers in the middle of a school pickup line. Kids stand nearby, curious but oblivious to the tension adults are feeling. Parents are whispering, pointing, recording with phones. Everyone senses that something unusual is happening, but no one fully understands it yet. From this angle, the story seems clear. Someone is being arrested. Someone has done something wrong. The officers are following procedure. It's a scenario we've all seen countless times in movies, news clips, or our own neighborhoods. And naturally, our minds start to fill in the gaps. We look at the man's calm demeanor and interpret it in one of two ways. Is this confidence, or is it arrogance? Is he hiding guilt behind a neutral face? And when the officers hesitate, even briefly, we assume uncertainty must mean something is off. Snap judgments start to form almost unconsciously. Notice how easy it is to take what we see at face value. The uniforms, the handcuffs, the commands, all of it signals authority and consequence. And we, watching from a distance, instinctively side with one of the visible powers, either the officers doing their jobs or the man resisting in some unseen way. It feels like a natural response. But that's exactly what this phase is built to do. Shape your assumptions before the story unfolds. It's in these first moments that human perception becomes interesting. We judge behavior, posture, and facial expressions. We infer intentions from gestures. And most importantly, we rarely stop to ask the deeper questions like, why is this happening? Or, could there be more than meets the eye? Even the surrounding crowd contributes to the narrative our minds create. Parents clutch their children a little closer. Phones are lifted, capturing the scene. Whispered commentary spreads like wildfire. Each reaction reinforces the assumption that something must be seriously wrong. And if we're honest with ourselves, we might even feel that same rush of certainty, just as the crowd does. But let's slow down. Look carefully at the officer's movements. Notice the subtle hesitations, the way glances are exchanged. The man's calm posture doesn't quite fit the usual patterns of resistance or aggression. Yet on first impression, all of this is easily overlooked. Our brains want to simplify, to categorize, to assign guilt or innocence based purely on surface-level cues. And this is where most of us start forming a narrative in our minds. A story about right and wrong, about authority and defiance. It feels complete, even though it's far from the full picture. And that's the key. Surface-level interpretation is powerful, but also dangerously incomplete. It's important to recognize that instinctive judgment is part of how we process the world. But in moments like this, those snap assumptions can mislead us. They prepare us to be surprised later, when the full context is revealed and everything we thought we understood suddenly shifts. Take a moment now to reflect on your own assumptions. Without knowing the full story, what do you think is happening here? Which side are you naturally leaning toward, and why? How much of that judgment is influenced by uniforms, context, or first impressions? What role do first impressions play in shaping our judgments about people? And could they sometimes lead us completely astray? Keep that question in mind as we move forward, because the next phase of this story will challenge everything we think we know about authority, perception, and the true identity of the man at the center of this scene. As the scene continues to unfold, the initial assumptions start to feel less certain. The man isn't struggling, he isn't panicking, and he isn't aggressive. Yet the arrest is happening anyway. On first glance, everything looked straightforward. But now, small details begin to raise questions. Look at the officers for a moment. Notice their movements. There's hesitation, barely perceptible, almost imperceptible, but it's there. A subtle shift in posture, a pause before each command. Their eyes meet, if only briefly, in a silent exchange that seems to question what they're doing. It's a fleeting moment, but in it lies a clue. Perhaps what we assumed about this situation is only a surface-level truth. And then, consider the man again. Calm, composed, not defiant, not angry, not fearful. Just still. It doesn't fit the script of a typical arrest. Our brains have built a story based on pattern recognition. Someone in this scenario, at this time, with these actions, must be guilty or at fault. That's how we process the world, fast, instinctively by patterns. But patterns don't always capture the full context. This is where the first reinterpretation begins. We start to question, what if our assumptions were shaped more by habit than by reality? What if authority, both the officers and even ourselves, rely on familiar patterns instead of looking at the details in front of us? The calm demeanor of the man, the subtle hesitation of the officers, the reactions of the crowd, each element now suggests that there might be more to the story than we initially thought. It's in these subtle shifts, these almost invisible cues, that perspective begins to change. The scene is no longer simply about someone being arrested. It's about how we perceive authority, how we interpret behavior, and how quickly we assign meaning to actions without full context. Pause for a moment and imagine yourself here. Watching from the sidelines, your brain wants to categorize the situation. But now, something doesn't add up. You start to feel that twinge of doubt, that uncomfortable realization that what seemed obvious might be misleading. And that's exactly the point. Stories like this are less about the event itself and more about how we interpret it. At this stage, our instinctive judgments are being challenged, not by drama or spectacle, but by small, observable truths that don't fit the narrative we formed moments ago. That's the subtle shift, the first reinterpretation. And it's powerful because it doesn't demand you abandon your initial assumptions completely. It only asks you to hold them lightly, to notice that reality can be more nuanced than it appears. How often do you think authority relies on patterns instead of context? Think about it. When someone acts calmly where we expect aggression, when procedures are followed in unusual ways, when the cues of the moment don't match the patterns we know, how often does that change the way authority responds? Or, more broadly, how often do we respond to patterns without looking deeper? By now, the scene is no longer simple. It's layered. It's subtle. And our first instinct to judge, so strong, so fast, so immediate, is starting to feel incomplete. The surface-level story that we believed is beginning to shift, and our minds are being invited to see beyond it. In the next moments, we'll continue to explore this story. The reinterpretation is far from over. There's another layer waiting, a deeper revelation that will challenge not just our assumptions about this man and the officers, but also about the roles we assign to authority in our daily lives. But for now, pause and reflect on that first question. Notice how your own judgments may have started to waver. Notice how subtle shifts in perception can change the story without a single dramatic action. This is the power of observation and the beginning of understanding the real narrative behind what seems like a simple school pickup. So far, what we've witnessed appears straightforward, or at least it did. But now, notice how the meaning of every prior action begins to shift, even though nothing new has technically happened. No new arrests, no new confrontations, no sudden revelations. Yet the scene feels heavier, more layered. Look again at the man standing calmly. Nothing has changed in his posture. Nothing has changed in his demeanor. But after the first reinterpretation, those same calm gestures now feel almost defiant. Not in a confrontational way, but in a way that quietly disrupts our initial assumptions. Suddenly, what we once categorized as normal, or perhaps suspicious, takes on a new significance. The pattern we thought we understood now feels incomplete. And consider the officers. Their brief pauses, those fleeting glances exchanged just moments ago, they now seem less like hesitation and more like recognition. Recognition that something about this situation doesn't fit the usual protocol. Even though they haven't said a word, their body language tells a story we didn't notice at first glance. Each nod, each shift of weight, each subtle glance carries meaning we're only beginning to interpret. It's remarkable how our minds react to this type of escalation. The situation itself hasn't changed. No new actions. Yet because the context of what we saw earlier is now being reconsidered, tension grows. We feel it in our own reactions, in the way our curiosity sharpens, in the slight discomfort that comes from realizing we may have judged too quickly. This is escalation without spectacle. It's the power of meaning over motion. Instead of relying on dramatic events, this story uses our own assumptions and perspective to build tension. The calm demeanor of the man, the officer's subtle cues, the crowd's whispered speculation, all of it becomes amplified because our interpretation of these actions has evolved. Notice how ordinary elements take on new significance. The man's hands resting lightly at his sides, the way he glances briefly toward the waiting parents, the soft exhale before each officer's move. These small gestures, initially overlooked, now carry weight. They suggest composure under scrutiny, perhaps understanding without confrontation, perhaps authority in disguise. And that's the point of this stage in the story. Escalation is psychological. We feel it because our brain is reconciling what it saw before with what it knows now. We're seeing the same events twice, but the meaning has changed. Each second stretches, each glance feels more consequential, each moment feels more loaded with significance. It's a quiet tension, but it's undeniable. It's in moments like this that we realize tension doesn't require chaos. Suspense doesn't require new drama. Sometimes, it emerges from the subtle reinterpretation of the familiar. And that reinterpretation depends on perspective, observation, and context, all things that can shift the story completely without a single new action. Now, take a step back and reflect. What we've seen so far hasn't changed in terms of action, but our understanding has. How often does this happen in daily life, when we assume meaning from surface-level events without fully considering the context? How often do we misinterpret intention because we're focused on patterns instead of subtle details? How often do you notice that the meaning of a situation changes, even when nothing new actually happens? This is a crucial point in the story. The stage is set. The calm demeanor, the hesitant gestures, the subtle cues, they're all waiting for the next shift. The moment when understanding transforms completely, when a new perspective emerges that will challenge everything we thought we knew about the situation. And that moment is coming soon. But for now, notice how the story has grown without adding a single dramatic action. That's the power of meaning over events. And it's precisely this shift in perception that will make the identity reveal the next major pivot, not just surprising, but deeply impactful. Keep that in mind as we move forward. The stage is set, the audience's perception is primed, and the story is quietly escalating, all through the power of observation, interpretation, and the subtle shift in meaning. The moment we've been approaching, the subtle buildup of doubt, hesitation, and observation, now reaches its turning point. Everything we assumed about this situation is about to change, not through new action, but through revelation. And it's here that our understanding pivots entirely. The man, calm and collected all along, is revealed for who he truly is. The badge he carries, once dismissed as ordinary, now becomes meaningful in an unexpected way. He is not simply another parent, not just a bystander, not even a typical figure of authority. He holds a position of legal authority within the very system that had just restrained him. In fact, he is their district court judge. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Everything we thought we knew, the assumed guilt, the patterns we used to judge him, the instinctive side we had taken in our minds suddenly shifts. The calm demeanor, which once seemed ambiguous, now carries a weight of quiet authority. The officer's subtle hesitation, previously just a fleeting observation, now reveals recognition and respect. Our previous interpretations are challenged, reframed, and almost completely inverted. This is the moral pivot. The story is no longer about arrest or misbehavior. It's about perception, assumption, and how quickly we assign respect or judgment. It forces us to ask a deeper question, one that resonates far beyond this single scene. Should respect come from a role, or should it exist before we know someone's role? Think about it. In this moment, respect isn't demanded through confrontation. It isn't signaled through force. It's inherent in presence, calmness, and the subtle recognition of authority, even before it's explicitly known. And yet, our instincts initially denied that respect, relying instead on appearances, uniforms, and assumptions. This isn't just a story about one man. It's a reflection of how we often assess others in daily life. Notice how the officers respond now. Their movements are careful, deliberate. Their posture changes, not because they were coerced, but because recognition has reframed the meaning of the entire encounter. The arrest, the gestures, the hesitations, all of it is reinterpreted in a new light. What once seemed like defiance or calm indifference now reads as quiet command and composure. And the audience, us, the viewers, experiences a similar shift. Our judgments, formed in moments of assumption, are challenged. The story has flipped, not through action, but through context and revelation. The moral pivot is complete. Authority, respect, and perception are shown to be far more nuanced than initial appearances suggest. It's in this pivot that we can reflect on ourselves. How often do we assign respect only after recognizing someone's title or status? How often do we withhold it because appearances mislead us? This moment invites introspection, not as accusation, but as observation. It challenges us to recognize the quiet authority in composure, in presence, in what lies beneath immediate perception. And this revelation sets up the next phase of the story, the broader perspective, where we explore systemic patterns, human behavior, and the subtleties of authority. But for now, the pivot has landed. What was once a simple scene, a school pickup and a routine intervention, has transformed into a story about perception, moral judgment, and the meaning of respect itself. Hold on to that engagement question. Should respect come from a role, or should it exist before we know someone's role? The answer may vary depending on context, but the reflection it inspires is universal. In the next moments, we'll step back and look at this scene in a wider context, exploring what it tells us about assumptions, authority, and the power of observation itself. Now that we've witnessed the identity reveal, the man's calm authority, the officer's subtle recognition, we can step back and look at the larger implications. What does this moment tell us not just about one individual, but about the systems and structures around us. We often think of authority as a force that enforces order, maintains rules, and keeps things predictable. Yet, in this story, authority alone didn't fully determine the outcome. The officers acted based on patterns they recognized, instinctively following procedure. It was only the subtle signals, the calm presence, the unspoken recognition of a role they didn't yet fully understand, that shifted the scene. This raises an important question about systems in general. Consider any institution, schools, courts, workplaces, or governments. Systems rely on rules, patterns, and hierarchies to function efficiently. Yet, when rigidly applied without context, even the most well-intentioned authority can misfire. In this scene, the arrest was procedurally correct in one sense, but context revealed a deeper layer that changed its meaning entirely. The structure alone could not account for nuance. Observation and restraint were just as critical. This is where reflection matters. Systems are designed to maintain order, but they are operated by humans, and humans make judgments. Authority and procedure are important, but so is the ability to pause, consider, and apply restraint when necessary. The balance between following rules and understanding context is delicate, and this school pickup scenario illustrates that perfectly. Notice the lessons that ripple beyond the immediate story. How often do we, as participants or observers in systems, make decisions based on pattern recognition rather than situational context? How often do we overlook subtle cues that could prevent misunderstandings, conflicts, or errors? And how often do we assume compliance or resistance based purely on appearances? In this particular moment, the subtle cues, the calm presence of the man, the officer's hesitation, the quiet acknowledgement of authority, revealed the limitations of relying solely on procedure. It demonstrates that systems are most effective not when authority acts unilaterally, but when authority is tempered with observation, understanding, and, yes, restraint. Do systems work best when they rely on authority or when they rely on restraint? Take a moment to think about it. When rules are followed blindly, errors can happen. When authority is unquestioned, assumptions can mislead. But when restraint is applied thoughtfully, decisions become more nuanced, fair, and effective. This doesn't undermine the system, it strengthens it. It demonstrates that effectiveness depends on human judgment as much as it depends on rules. And this reflection isn't limited to one school parking lot or one unusual arrest. It applies everywhere. In courts, in classrooms, in workplaces, even in daily life. Systems, no matter how well designed, function through human interaction. And in those interactions, perception, observation, and thoughtful restraint are often as powerful as authority itself. So, as we step back from the individual story, consider the broader perspective. The calm authority of one person revealed limitations in the way patterns are applied. The officer's hesitation highlighted the need for context. And as observers, we learned how our assumptions, expectations, and instant judgments shape the way we interpret events. Systems may rely on authority, but they thrive when authority is balanced with discernment. With that in mind, keep the question close. Do systems work best when they rely on authority or when they rely on restraint? Your answer may change depending on the context, but the reflection it inspires is universal. Next, we'll move into the resolution phase where all these threads, individual presence, assumptions, authority, restraint, and perspective come together. And we'll see how a quiet scene in a school pickup line can leave a lasting impression about judgment, trust, and understanding. The school parking lot is quiet now. The cars have moved, the children are reunited with their parents, and the officers have returned to their routine. Nothing spectacular happens in these final moments. No action, no confrontation, but the story has already reached its resolution. Because meaning is often more powerful than events themselves. Think back to the initial scene. A man being handcuffed, officers taking action, parents watching in concern. At first glance, it was a simple, even alarming scenario. But over time, we learned something deeper. We saw how calm presence can shift perception, how hesitation can reveal nuance, and how authority interacts with human judgment and restraint. The resolution isn't about punishment, reward, or dramatic justice. It's about understanding. The outcome, the man's identity, the officer's recognition, the crowd's realization, matters far less than the shift in how we perceive the story. What began as a moment of assumed wrongdoing became a lesson in perception, judgment, and respect. It's here, in reflection, that we find the real value of the story. The incident itself is fleeting, but the insight it leaves is enduring. We're reminded that our assumptions are fallible, that authority is complex, and that quiet observation often reveals more truth than any immediate action. Now, consider the patterns throughout this narrative. First impressions were misleading. Snap judgments occurred. Reinterpretations emerged. Meaning shifted without a single new dramatic event. And in the end, understanding came not from what happened, but from how we reflected on what had already happened. This is the essence of resolution by meaning. It teaches us that even small moments, a calm stance, a pause, a look, can carry lessons that echo far beyond the scene itself. The school pickup line, the officer's gestures, the parents' reactions, all of it becomes part of a larger story about human perception and judgment. And this brings us to one final reflection, one last engagement point. As viewers, as participants in the world, as witnesses to countless small moments every day, how do we choose to interpret what we see? Do we default to assumptions, or do we pause, observe, and allow context to guide understanding? What would you have done differently in that moment, if anything, and what does that reveal about how we judge others? The beauty of this resolution is that it doesn't force a conclusion. There's no verdict to be delivered, no final judgment to impose. Instead, it invites thought, reflection, and a deeper awareness of how we interpret people, authority, and events in our own lives. So as we leave this scene, the takeaway isn't the outcome itself. It's the meaning we derive from it. How calm observation can prevent misunderstanding. How subtle cues carry more weight than we realize. How respect, judgment, and authority are constantly interacting in ways that are often invisible, yet profoundly important. In this quiet resolution, we see that stories, like life itself, are less about the events and more about the understanding we gain from them. And that understanding is something each of us carries forward into the next moment, the next interaction, the next story. So, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences, your own judgments, and your own perceptions. What have you learned, not just from this story, but from the way you watch, think, and interpret the world around you? Because in the end, it's not what happened that matters most. It's what we take away from it. The scene is quieted. Cars drive away. The children's laughter returns to its normal rhythm, and the officers depart, returning to their daily routine. On the surface, it may seem like just another day at the school pickup line, but the story we've followed reveals something far more subtle and important. We've witnessed the unfolding of a situation, initially interpreted through assumptions, and later reframed through context, observation, and insight. At first, our judgments were based on surface-level cues, calmness, gestures, uniforms, and routine. Then, through subtle shifts and eventual revelation, we discovered that appearances can be misleading and understanding requires perspective. Now, after all the reinterpretations, pivots, and reflections, we reach a point where the story leaves the narrative itself behind. The events are complete, yet the real focus is on the lessons we take away. The interplay between authority and restraint, perception and reality, and the human tendency to judge based on patterns rather than context. Stories like this are more than just sequences of events. They are mirrors, reflecting the ways we process the world around us, the judgments we make, and the assumptions we carry, even when we don't realize it. And as we consider the implications of this story, it's natural to ask, how would I have acted in this situation? How would I have interpreted it if I were present? This is where reflection becomes essential. Pause for a moment and think about your instinctive response. Would you have jumped to judgment like many onlookers did at first? Would you have noticed the subtle cues of calm authority and hesitation? Would you have waited, observed, and allowed context to guide your understanding? What would you have done differently in that moment, if anything? Your answer may vary, and that's precisely the point. There is no right or wrong response here. Only insight into how we perceive, how we judge, and how we act under uncertainty. Reflection is not about finding fault. It's about awareness. It's about understanding why we reacted one way and what we might do differently when faced with similar situations in the future. And in thinking about that, consider the broader lesson. Real understanding often emerges from restraint, observation, and context. Authority, rules, and patterns matter, but they are most effective when tempered by insight and discernment. Likewise, our personal responses, how we choose to interpret what we see, can shape not only our understanding of a single moment, but our interactions with the world over time. Stories like this, quiet and seemingly ordinary, can leave lasting impressions precisely because they reveal what our instincts, our assumptions, and our judgments are capable of. They challenge us to pause, reflect, and recognize the subtleties we might otherwise overlook. So, as this story comes to a close, carry with you this reflection. Think about the moments in your own life where appearances may have misled you, where assumptions guided your actions, or where restraint and observation could have changed the outcome. And notice how even small, calm actions can shift perception, understanding, and respect in ways that ripple far beyond a single instant. Ultimately, the resolution of this story is not measured in events, arrests, or authority. It is measured in insight. And the engagement doesn't end with the narrative. It continues in how we reflect, consider, and act in the moments that follow. So take one final moment and answer the question for yourself. What would you have done differently in that moment, if anything? Your answer, your reflection, is the final piece of this story. And in that reflection lies the true meaning. Understanding human behavior, respecting nuance, and recognizing that the most important lessons often emerge quietly after the events themselves have passed.